Hey there, this is the Resistor Vic podcast. I'm here to get folks thinking about politics as something that's really about regular people like you and me, and to realize that together we can make a difference. I'm Vic Myers. Welcome to The Resistance. This is episode 28 of the Resistor Vic podcast, and tonight we've got Karen Breslin with us, candidate for U.S. Senate in Colorado. This is actually her second trip back. We're having her on to get an update and see how things are going. So, Karen, welcome back.
Thank you, Vic. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm happy to. And let's start right off for those of you who are going to be listening and say, wow, you know what? I really want to help this person in her campaign, whether it be through volunteering or donating money, which frankly is the most important thing right now, but it's a Christmas season. But anyway, you know what I mean. If you look down at the bottom, and for those who are only listening and not watching, it's Breslin, BRESLINFOR, Colorado.com, BreslinForColorado.com. Karen Breslin, tell us how things are going.
Well, campaign work is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And I've had tough jobs before and tough professional situations, but this is by far the most challenging professional thing I've ever done. This is my second intensive campaign, my third campaign overall. And this one is in some ways the most rewarding and in some ways the hardest. You never feel like you're doing enough. You're always scrambling to catch up. There are 1,000,001 details to attend to. Staying on top of this insane administration is a job unto itself. And so it's just, it's a lot, but it's also really rewarding. I've been to 25 counties. I've been in front of thousands of Democrats at this point, probably a couple thousand, I would guess, maybe 3,000. And, people love to hear from candidates. And I'm sure they get sick of our speeches after a while, but they really do appreciate us.
Depends on the speech.
Yeah. But I've had people come up to me and not really say anything to me except hi, and they'll throw their arms around me and hug me. And it's the most lovely thing. But, it is hard work for sure. But I'm holding up and my team's holding up. I've got some great young volunteers who just keep hanging in there with me. And so we're getting it done.
Well, you're working to unseat Hickenlooper, which makes me want to hug you. So tell people, for those who didn't see you on here last time or don't know about you yet, what does Karen Breslin bring to the table?
I am a political science professor. I've been doing that for about 30 years. And to be a political science professor, the credentialing usually is a PhD in political science. I have a master's degree. I have a law degree, which is a pretty good credential for political science as well. And then I did additional graduate coursework in international studies at DU's Corbell School. So come to this with that educational background. I worked for 25 years for the National Park Service in various capacities, retiring as senior policy advisor to the regional director. I was assistant regional director for communications, legislation, and park planning, which is essentially how we're going to serve the public. That's the planning piece of it, facilities and that sort of thing. And I was a reporter covering Congress in 1992 and the executive branch for another 7 years on top of that here in Colorado. And so, as well as developments in the state. So I bring to the race a pretty comprehensive background in federal law and policy. And I forgot to mention that I'm also an attorney and have done public interest litigation, which is litigation that basically vindicates the public interest. It's taught me quite a lot about the court system and how difficult it is to achieve political change through the courts. And so here I am in the political environment now, trying the electoral process, because I've kind of done it all. I went into journalism to change the world. I had that idealism that a lot of people of my generation had, looking at what was happening in the 60s and in the early 70s and wanting to be a part of leaving the country better than I found it. And I don't know how you feel about it, Vic, but I look back so kind of fondly at the level of hope and optimism that we had, post Nixon, getting Nixon out of office, getting the Vietnam War wound down, and, Jimmy Carter coming onto the scene. He was an entirely different sort of political actor.
If I told you how I felt about all that, we'd have to have a different episode.
Okay. Well, for me, it was a time where I believed that the country was going to go in the right direction. And that's really what spurred me into kind of the career path that I've had. Like, the through line through all of it is a desire to make a difference. And, here I am still trying.
You're looking for your George Bailey moment. One of the things that I've noticed in your recent TikToks is you're starting to put more emphasis on AI, which really lit me up because I recently read a story in the AP about Customs and Border Patrol using license plate readers all across the country, and then working with local law enforcement. They'll call up local law enforcement and say, stop this vehicle. Local law enforcement makes up a reason, searches them, and if they can find any reason at all, arrest them, confiscate their stuff. And Border Patrol, that we're talking about literally all across the country, they're doing this, and they're using AI to help them do it. So when I saw your recent posts on TikTok, and on TikTok, you're Breslin for Colorado also?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Follow her. If you're on TikTok, go follow her there too.
That's fine. It might be Breslin for U.S. Senate. I can check here real quick instead.
I think you're right. I think it is U.S. Senate. But you're on Facebook as well?
Yes. And I think the only thing that's actually Breslin for Colorado is the website. It's Breslin for Senate.
Yeah, Breslin for Senate. So check her out on Facebook and TikTok as well. So tell us what is it about AI that has put this at a high place in your campaign?
Well, just in the last, I don't know, couple of months maybe, pretty recently, there is just a growing awareness of the dangers. And this is partly because books have come out. There's a book out, I think it's called If Anyone Builds It, We All Die, which is a pretty inflammatory book title, but one that certainly catches one's attention. And so those authors are making the rounds to the various programs. There's a organization, a nonprofit public interest organization, from what I gather, that is dedicated to AI safety, and the individual who runs that, or is executive director, or has some key role in that, Tristan Harris, I believe is his name. Jeffrey Hinton, who is the Nobel laureate in computer science, I believe, very recently considered, quote, the godfather of AI. He is making the rounds. So all of these individuals are starting to stir the pot about the long-term safety, or even short-term safety, of AI.
What does that mean for a Senator Karen Breslin? What is it that you want to do about this?
Well, the problem is bigger than, there's a psychosis that is setting in for people who have lots of conversations with chatbots, because the chatbots kind of reinforce your thinking and then sort of mislead you into thinking that there's something exceptional going on in your thoughts. That's a category of harms, that, that it's technology that is messing with people psychologically and causing harm. So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is the way the environmental effects of it. So these data centers that use enormous amounts of water and enormous amounts of electricity is completely inconsistent with trying to deal with climate change, completely inconsistent with water shortages that are also climate driven. And so that's a huge environmental piece. So you've got the safety piece, you've got the environmental piece, and then you've got the third, more substantial and scarier piece, which is that Hinton and others believe that there is I think I just heard him say this yesterday, that there is a significant risk of the technology getting outside of our control.
What do we need to, because the Trump administration, the Republicans in Congress, are very adamant that they don't want states putting any kind of regulation on AI at the state level. And Are you saying that as a senator, you would be pushing back on that, not only allowing the states to regulate AI, but look for regulations for safety and other reasons as well in the Senate?
Yes, there needs to be national legislation that regulates all aspects of AI, things like deep fakes. So we know that the information we're getting is valid. That all by itself is a whole informational, what do we want to call that?
That's a big separate basket over here.
Yes, I left that out of the basket of horribles, but it, it definitely is one. So the whole labeling and disclosure and all of that sort of stuff. And then the whole social effects of AI psychosis, encouraging people to, do dangerous things, all of that, that's a whole nother thing. You've got to think about it in terms of consumers. You've got to think about it in terms of public health. You've got to think about it in terms of environmental protection. You've got to think about it in terms of national security. So John Hickenlooper has thought about AI, and John Hickenlooper's idea is to create a federal advisory committee that makes voluntary standards that are enforced, wait for it, not by the government, but by third-party consultants, private companies.
Because private industry has such a glowing track record of regulating themselves.
Yes, precisely.
In any industry.
Exactly. And to me, I mean, I wouldn't be running against Hickenlooper if I thought he was the right person for the job. But his lack of
I have to give a disclaimer here because okay. I like you as a candidate because of, I've read your platform, I've talked with you, I've listened to you, and that's why I like you as a candidate. But if you weren't out here running, I would be looking for anybody else besides Hickenlooper. I am biased, and I'm going to tell everybody that up front because A, he's 73 years old. B, he's one of these centrist third way so-called moderate Democrats, which makes him to the right of Ronald Reagan, and that is the last thing we need right now. C, the dude went into government without having the kind of understanding of government that you do. He is what we get when you put people in office who don't understand the workings of government.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Vic. And this is where it shows up. So here's, technology that can alter life on Earth, and by all accounts will. There isn't much disagreement about that. It's only a question of when. And some of the time frames are 5 to 10 years, 5 to 20 years on the outer end of it. Yeah.
Well, you just give me if anybody out there is making T-shirts, if you can put Hickenlooper's head on a dinosaur and label it Jurassic John, I will buy that T-shirt. Because, yes, the guy is 73 years old. Nothing against 73-year-old folks, but that's time to go golf or do your own private business. It's not time to legislate for the next generation because he doesn't get it. And he hasn't been around for 5 years.
Yeah. So I
go on and on, but we're here to talk about you. Don't let me get off on a tangent.
Oh no, yeah, I agree with you completely about everything you said. And it's an enormous undertaking to regulate this industry, but it should be done at the federal level because you don't want a patchwork of 50 states trying to do their own thing. But that means the federal government needs to get off the dime. And right now, the federal government has not. And so states are free to regulate. And his executive order, he has no authority to control the state's regulation of AI.
So,
now, the Constitution might have something to say about that because there is the Commerce Clause and that restrains state power to some extent. But Trump by himself has no authority to try to control that.
So tell me about how the campaign's going. You said you've been to 25 counties?
Counties, yes, 25 counties. Well,
You're halfway there almost.
Yeah, there's 64, so we've got a ways to go, but I hope to get to a bunch of the other ones over the next 8 weeks, because if anybody's watching this, I get on the ballot. Hickenlooper may use the petition process where you get a lot of signatures, but I get on the ballot through the caucus and assembly process, and that begins in March. So all of the active campaigning for those of us who want to get on the primary ballot, that has to be done between now and March 3rd if you haven't already started. And I fortunately started a long time ago, so we're not in too bad a shape on that. Anyway.
I want to shift gears a little bit here. I'm curious about, we saw the November elections where Democrats just kicked butt all across the country. We had Zohran Mamdani in New York, who was basically, I mean, the establishment Democrats were doing everything they could to keep him from winning that election. At least that's my view of it. So when you look at his victory, you look at their names are slipping my mind right now. Spanberger and the other one, New Jersey and Virginia, and all the other victories from last November. What do you think about that? Does that give you hope for where we're going?
I think it's a little soon to say. I think that 2026 is going to feel far off. I think a lot will depend on what happens between now and then. I think there's a lot of resistance building to Trump, but I think I'm not sure if that's going to translate into victory in 2026. I don't know why I'm saying that. It's more of a gut feeling than it is something that I can put words and logic behind.
I think it's going to depend on whether or not the Democrats will give people something to run for. I think if they run against Trump and just against Trump, I think it's going to be a wash and that blue wave will die down. But I think if we can go out and not shun candidates because they're not millionaires, if we can take a hard look and bring real grassroots candidates to the ballot, then I think that it gives us a real shot to have a 1932 historic wave.
Yeah.
And for reference, for you younger folks, make myself sound 100. In 1932, when FDR was running, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Karen, I think you're probably better educated in it than I am. In 32, when FDR ran, the Republicans owned the House and the Senate. And his victory was so overwhelming, his coattails were so long, that the Democrats took over the House and the Senate with huge majorities that enabled him to implement the New Deal. And I think that's what we could get if the people will take back the Democratic Party away from the consultants.
Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, do you think the powers that be are going to allow that to happen?
Well, that's the catch. We need to not care whether or not they will allow, because they can pump as much money into races as they want. Just like you mentioned Laubacher a minute ago, her and Bennett. Laubacher's the establishment pick. Why? Because Tricia Calvarese is out there doing the grassroots progressive, focusing on Main Street CD4. Whereas Laubacher, they're like, oh, we think she has a better chance. And Bennett Bennett and Laubacher are doing joint fundraising together.
Hickenlooper.
It was Hickenlooper and Laubacher doing the joint fundraising. She is the establishment pick. She didn't even live in the district, and I'm still not convinced that she does now. But the point is, if she gets picked, it's because we let the party tell us who to pick, instead of us voters, the people who are affected the most. If we don't let that happen by going to our caucuses, by voting in the primaries, and we choose our candidates instead of waiting for the party to tell us, then I think we can have a 1932 type blue wave election that brings in people who will actually champion Main Street America again.
Yeah.
But it's up to us.
Yeah. That's been my message everywhere I've gone, because, before Julie got in, it really seemed like a Herculean challenge for a candidate like me. Um, and, people would express enthusiasm in my campaign, and they would always ask me, well, what about the money? And, the money shows up when the media attention shows up. And it really does require that, unless you've got your own bank account where you can buy the exposure so that people will know who you are, because there's just kind of no other way around it. And I say that having run a couple of campaigns now. I see the challenges. I don't have money. I'm not a wealthy person by any stretch of the imagination.
And just in case anybody thinks that Karen is being hyperbolic or whatever, in 2014, I ran for Congress in CD4, where Bobert is now. And I called up the Denver Post and asked them, it's like, hey, do you guys want to talk? Do you want to interview me? Whatever. And their only response was, how much money do you have? Mm-hmm. I told them, we're just getting started. And they're like, well, until you have $100,000 in the bank, you're not a real candidate. Mm-hmm. So that's what they do. The media, especially the mainstream legacy medias, they're not going to go out of their way to help grassroots, non-establishment people get elected to office, because that's just going to dilute their power.
Yeah,
so
that's a great point.
There you go, another tangent.
Yeah, no, but you totally, validated my experience, because sometimes you get a little rattled by it all, like, wow, really? What's going on here? Because again, my journalism training would not justify what you were told in 2024 or 2014, and it wouldn't justify the way I've been treated. Like I say, I wouldn't have expected a lot of coverage of me, but maybe a paragraph. And sometimes that's kind of all it takes, is for somebody to know that there's actually somebody else who's actively in the race.
Because a lot of people will look you up. If they see you mentioned, by Kyle Clark or the Denver Post or something, they'll take the time. They might take the time to go and Google you and say, oh, wow, look what she's running on.
Yeah, you give them a little more information than that they, if they actually understood I was a candidate, an actual active candidate with some credentials, they might go and look on their own. But when you just say, oh, this person's running, and you don't tell anybody much about them, it's pretty tough to get that encouragement. But I think where I'm headed with this thought is, one of the things that I finally have become convinced of, and this is a hard thing for me as someone who's long believed in journalism, that corporate journalism is now most of journalism, with the exception of people like you. And so much of what's out there is really about reinforcing the system that we have. And so if someone like Jasmine Crockett or name whatever high profile, seemingly counter-establishment person that's out there, they get attention because it benefits the corporate media, not because it benefits our democracy. And that's the difference between the journalistic ethics that I was,
have any thoughts on how we can resolve that conundrum?
Well, you're doing it with this podcast, but I would emphasize what you just said, which is, if somebody's got a lot of media coverage, I would be asking lots of questions about that. Because why? What makes this particular candidate so appealing? And then stop thinking about the money as the most important thing about a candidate. Because if you focus exclusively on money, you're going to freeze out of the process, well, people like Vic and potentially people like me. People who are in it because they want to serve the public, not because they want to be career politicians. You aren't a career politician. I'm not a career politician.
Question for you is, do you think, given our discussion over the media and all that stuff, one of my frustrations with not just the media, but America in general, is we have totally gotten away from any kind of serious, real anti-monopoly enforcement. Mm-hmm. Do you think breaking up all these media companies would be better for democracy?
Absolutely. I think there ought to be limits on how many outlets they can own. I think there needs to be a clear disclosure when, like I was just curious to see who owns 9 News, who owns Kyle Clark's radio TV station. And if you go all the way back up the food chain, BlackRock, one of the big private equity companies, I think it might even be the biggest, is
Aren't they supposed to be a real estate company?
They do it all, as far as I know. Yeah. But they have substantial holdings in the parent company of Channel 9. And so when you can trace back corporate ownership like that, it's a safe bet that those media companies are not going to be pushing an agenda that is contrary to their interests. And I'm not suggesting to you that the corporate ownership means that individuals come into the newsroom and monitor in that way, but you sort
Unless you're at CBS News.
Well, exactly. You also know, and this is true in any organization, you also know what the cultural norms are of wherever you work. And you know that if you value your livelihood, you're not going to step outside of those norms. And so as a journalist in an organization like that, if you're working for Fox, you're probably not going to be pitching progressive Democrat stories because that's not what Fox wants. And so, there's a certain level of flexibility there. But look how hard the Washington Post went in for Hillary. And, just story after story promoting Hillary as a candidate in 2016 when she was running against Bernie. And that, so that corporate influence cannot be overlooked. And when I came up in journalism, there was still a lot of diversity of ownership. There was still hometown newspapers where a local family had a newspaper and, their family prestige was in creating this great journalistic institution. There was still diversity in radio station ownership and TV station ownership. And now it's, a handful of companies. So absolutely, I think that media concentration is a big part of the problem. But now that, AI is going to be in the mix and people are turning away from those traditional outlets, I don't know what that's going to lead to. But for the time being, I would very much be in favor of breaking up those media companies.
Yeah, I haven't asked you your top 3 issues yet, and we need to get that in here for folks. So tell me your top 3 issues that you're running, the top 3 things that 6 years from now I can say, Senator Breslin, this is what you ran on. What have you done to accomplish it?
Well, I'm just thinking a little bit here about how I want to explain what I'm thinking. I would say that we are beyond, we have long since passed the threshold point of losing our democracy. That the democracy has already been eroded to a substantial extent. That's what I'm trying to say. And just today, Trump seizes this tanker under some kind of an emergency, whatever. And I looked up the authority for that. And sure enough, the legislation is vague about what constitutes an emergency that would authorize Trump to take this action. And so at every turn, the executive order that we just discussed a moment ago about AI, on a daily basis, he is violating our system of government. He is violating the U.S. Constitution, probably multiple times a day. But it seems like at least on a daily basis. And we are no longer the country that we were before he was elected. And so what I would say about that is that if we don't put a stop to that, and that's really all of us, not just the election in 2026, but everything that we do between now and then, we may face the situation of the election being irrelevant in the sense that why would he leave power? He's already once tried to stay in power. And if you're waiting for the courts to do something, well, he's routinely ignoring court orders. And if you're waiting for Congress to do something, well, we see where that's gotten us up to now, with spineless Democrats and Republicans happy to go along with anything that Trump says. And at some point, the fear of Trump becomes pervasive enough when he's able to control so many institutions of society, universities, law firms, media companies, and pull people off the street and dump them places because, immigration. Let's just murder people in the Caribbean because, oh, well, I say so. We are living under a tyrant right this minute. So 6 years from now, I can't sit here and say what I've tried to do, assuming there's still a U.S. Senate of any consequence in 6 years. And I can't tell you what I would try to do, what I've accomplished to try to fight that, then, I will have failed. Hopefully I'm able to tell you, here are all the things that we did, and here's how we got our democracy back. So that's the first point. But you'd like to respond, I take it.
Actually, the button that brought you back into the half screen, but we are getting closer to that hour. So there's the one. You've got the last minute or two to make it your last word. Okay,
economic fairness. So affordability is about economic fairness. Don't let the media landscape, the commentary people, Ezra Klein, all those people confuse you about what's going on here. People are struggling because the political system is rigged. This isn't a micro problem or a problem in 2025. This is a problem that goes back decades. And so if we're going to actually have affordability again for most of us or many of us, it should be for all of us. That's the first thing to say. But the second thing to say is we've got to get to the root causes of it. That's a tax system that actually taxes the wealthiest of our society and the largest corporations as compared to the rest of us. And then I would, immigration. What's happening with the treatment of people who have come into this country is abusive and horrifying, and I would do something about that. And I'll add a fourth, which is the environment. And my time.
Okay, then. So 6 years from now, we can say that you were a part of helping to save our democracy by reinstituting norms in our government, making the co-equal branch of government co-equal again. And let's see, fighting for the environment. You did things to help our grandkids have a place to live. Mm-hmm. And my brain's old. Immigration. Yeah. 4 years ago, or six, eight, when Obama was president, one of the things that I said was, you've got to do something about immigration, because they're going to just use that as a club to beat up on Democrats. We've got to have immigration reform. And they tried, and the Republicans stopped it from happening. And then when Joe Biden got in, that should have been one of his top three priorities. Number one should have been prosecuting Trump. And number two probably should have been addressing our immigration system so that it works. The problem isn't that we have hordes of people coming over the border. The problem is that we don't have an immigration system that works, period. But anyway, I said you could have the last word. So one more time, tell people yourself, where do they need to go if they want to contribute or otherwise sign up to help you?
BreslinForColorado.com. Please sign up to caucus. There's a place to sign up to volunteer, and there's also a place to donate. And all of that is what we need right now.
And there's the website with the donate buttons all over it, folks. Go and check it out. And there's more information there than we could cover here. How do I get that there? And there you have it. For those of you in the comments, I'm sorry I didn't get to more of your questions. But Karen, thanks for coming on again. And I look forward to, I don't know, maybe in a couple more months. When's the caucus? Let's see, our caucus is in March, right? Yeah. Maybe we'll talk again before caucus and see how things are going.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Vic. And thanks for your time. And thank you for doing what you're doing to try to save our democracy. It's really important work.
Just doing what I can, which is what we all should do.
Yeah.
All right. Don't go away.
Okay.
And folks, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for tuning in and making us part of your day. Good day. Well, folks, looks like we're back at the barn and it's time to call it a day. I sure do appreciate you spending your time with me. If you want to help keep this podcast going by supporting me, you can get a paid subscription on Substack, where I'm Resistor Vic. Or if you're the type that'd rather go to PayPal, I'm also resistorvic@gmail.com. Thanks again.